The moment I heard the sound of rain against the glass, I knew my ordinary life was about to disappear forever. I used to believe that bad decisions were the ones we made after thinking too much. I was wrong. Sometimes, the choices that change everything happen in a single second, when fear takes over and your heart moves faster than your mind. That night, the city of Chicago was drowning under a cold autumn storm. The streets reflected the neon lights like broken pieces of a dream, and I was driving my old Honda Civic home after another exhausting shift at the community center where I worked. I was 26 years old, carrying a bag full of paperwork, a half-finished coffee in the cup holder, and the same quiet hope I carried every day, that tomorrow would be a little easier than today. My life was simple. Small apartment. Small paycheck. Big dreams. I wasn't someone people noticed when I walked into a room. I wasn't wearing designer clothes or sitting at expensive restaurants surrounded by powerful people. I was just Claire Morgan, a woman who spent her days helping others and her nights wondering when life would finally slow down enough for her to breathe. But that night, everything changed because of one wrong turn. The rain became heavier as I turned onto a street I rarely used. My windshield wipers moved desperately, fighting against the storm, while the world outside became a blur of silver and black. I reached for my phone on the passenger seat, just for a second, checking the navigation because the road ahead was almost impossible to see. That 1 second was enough. The tires slipped on the wet pavement. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. My heartbeat filled my ears. No, 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 I whispered, pressing the brakes. But the car had already made its decision. Ahead of me, parked beneath the golden glow of a streetlight, was a black SUV unlike anything I had ever seen. It looked less like a vehicle and more like a symbol. Polished. Perfect. Untouchable. The kind of car that belonged to someone whose name opened doors and closed conversations. I tried to avoid it. I really did. But the distance disappeared too quickly. The sound came first. A sharp crash that cut through the storm. Then silence. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. I sat there gripping the steering wheel, listening to the rain tapping against the roof of my damaged car. My breathing was uneven. My mind kept repeating the same sentence. I just hit someone's car. Not just any car. The most expensive car I had ever seen. I stepped outside slowly, the rain immediately soaking through my jacket. My shoes splashed through the puddles as I looked at the damage. My old Civic had lost the battle completely. The SUV barely looked disturbed. I was already calculating how many years it would take me to pay for the repair when the driver's door opened. The sound made me freeze. A man stepped out. Tall. Calm. Wearing a perfectly tailored black coat that somehow looked untouched by the storm. He didn't rush. He didn't shout. He simply stood there, watching me like he was trying to understand a mystery. Then another door opened. And another. Men in dark suits appeared behind him, silent and alert. That was the moment I realized I hadn't just crashed into a stranger's car. I had crashed into someone important. Someone powerful. Someone everyone else seemed afraid to approach. The man looked at me with eyes that were impossible to read. Cold on the surface. But there was something hidden underneath. Something I couldn't understand. "Do you know who I am?" he asked. His voice was quiet, but it carried more weight than anger ever could. I swallowed hard and shook my head. "No. I'm sorry. I'll pay for the damage. I promise I'll find a way." For the first time, something changed in his expression. Not anger. Not disappointment. Curiosity. Like my answer surprised him. He looked at me standing in the rain, holding onto my broken umbrella and apologizing for a mistake that had already happened. And then he said something I would remember for the rest of my life. "You have no idea whose path you just crossed, Claire Morgan." My heart stopped. I had never told him my name. And in that moment, beneath the storm and the city lights, I understood one terrifying truth. The accident wasn't the beginning of my worst night. It was the beginning of a story I never saw coming. I thought the worst part of that night was the rain. I was wrong. The worst part was the silence after it. The kind of silence that follows a moment when your entire life changes direction and you are still trying to understand where the road disappeared. I sat in the passenger seat, staring through the window as the city lights blurred into golden lines across the glass. My hands were still trembling, even though I kept telling myself I was safe. I did not know if I believed it. The man beside me said nothing for several minutes. He simply watched the road ahead, calm and unreadable, like the storm outside had nothing to do with him. I had spent my whole life learning how to survive ordinary problems. Rent. Bills. Long shifts. Broken promises. I had never learned what to do when someone powerful stepped into my world and changed the rules. "You are afraid of me," he finally said. His voice was quiet, not angry. I looked at him. Should I not be? For the first time, something changed in his expression. Not anger. Something closer to understanding. Most people are. I looked away. The answer bothered me because it sounded like he was used to being feared. I remembered the way everyone moved around him, the way his presence filled every room before he even spoke. People like him lived in a world I only saw from a distance. Expensive cars. Private buildings. Men who opened doors before they reached them. My world was coffee that went cold because I was too busy working. My world was counting dollars at the grocery store and pretending I was not worried. Two completely different lives had collided because of one terrible decision. "Where are you taking me?" I asked. He did not answer immediately. His fingers rested against the steering wheel, and I noticed something strange. The same hands that looked powerful enough to control an entire city were holding the wheel carefully, almost gently. "Somewhere you can rest," he said. I laughed softly, without humor. You do realize that sounds exactly like something someone says before they make a terrible situation worse. A faint expression crossed his face. Almost a smile. Almost. "You are not what I expected." "And what did you expect?" I asked. He looked at me for a moment. Someone who would cry. Someone who would beg. Someone who would try to disappear. His eyes returned to the road. "You did none of those things." I did not know how to respond. Nobody had ever described my stubbornness as something valuable before. Usually, people called it difficult. We continued through the city until the buildings became larger and quieter. When the gates opened in front of the estate, I felt my chest tighten. It was not just a house. It was a reminder that I had crossed into a world where I did not know the rules. He noticed my reaction. "You are not a prisoner here," he said. I looked at him carefully. "Then why does it feel like I just entered a place I cannot leave?" For a moment, the powerful man everyone feared looked less like a king and more like someone carrying a burden he never wanted. "Because," he whispered, "sometimes protection feels like a cage when you do not know the reason behind it." Those words stayed with me as the doors opened. I stepped into a world built on secrets, power, and shadows. And I had no idea that the biggest secret waiting for me was not about him. It was about why fate had brought me there in the first place. The first thing I noticed about his home was not the size. It was the silence. I had expected something cold. Something intimidating. A place filled with people who looked at me like I did not belong. Instead, I found polished marble floors, warm lights, and a strange feeling that everyone inside this house was waiting for something they could not name. Waiting for him. Waiting for me. The man who had changed my entire night with a single decision walked several steps ahead, his expression unreadable. I followed because I did not know what else to do. My old life felt miles away, even though the city was still outside those gates. A woman in her 50s approached us near the entrance. She wore a simple black dress and carried herself with quiet confidence. "Mr. Romano," she said. "The guest room is prepared." Guest room. The word caught my attention. Not a cell. Not a locked room. A guest room. Maybe he noticed my reaction because he looked back at me. You can leave whenever you choose. I almost laughed. Can I really? His eyes held mine. Yes. There was no hesitation. No threat. Just a simple answer. That confused me more than anything else. I had spent the entire drive expecting control, demands, and fear. Instead, I was standing in front of a man everyone seemed afraid of, and he was giving me a choice. Then why bring me here? I asked. He became quiet. For a second, the confidence disappeared, and I saw something underneath. Something tired. Because tonight was not just an accident. My heart slowed. What does that mean? Before he could answer, another man entered the room. He was older, wearing glasses and holding a tablet. He looked at me, then at Mr. Romano. The information you requested is confirmed. Mr. Romano's expression changed instantly. Not colder. More focused. Say it. The older man glanced at me before speaking. The connection is real. I felt a chill move through me. Connection? What connection? Excuse me, I said. Can someone explain what is happening? Both men looked at me. For the first time since I arrived, I felt like I was the only person in the room who did not know the truth. Mr. Romano stepped closer, but he stopped several feet away. Like he was making sure I had space. Your name is Emily Carter. I nodded slowly. Yes. You grew up in Boston. You worked 2 jobs while finishing college. You moved to Manhattan 3 years ago. My eyebrows tightened. How do you know that? He did not answer immediately. Because someone has been watching your life for a long time. The words made my stomach turn. I crossed my arms, trying to hide how uncomfortable I felt. That is supposed to make me feel better? No, he said quietly. It is supposed to make you understand why tonight happened. I looked at him, searching for any sign that he was lying. I found none. That scared me even more. A powerful stranger knowing details about my life should have made me run. But something in his voice told me there was a reason behind all of this. Something bigger than money. Bigger than power. Who are you? I asked. The question seemed simple, but the answer changed the atmosphere around us. He looked toward the dark windows overlooking the city. Someone who has spent years protecting a world that never gave him peace. Then he looked back at me. And someone who believes you were brought into it for a reason. I wanted to reject those words. I wanted to tell him that I was just an ordinary woman who made one wrong turn in the rain. But deep inside, I knew my life had already changed. Because the accident was not the beginning of the story. It was the moment the hidden story finally found me. I did not sleep that night. Not because the room was uncomfortable. It was the opposite. The guest room was warmer and quieter than any place I had lived before. The bed was softer than anything I could afford. The curtains blocked the city lights perfectly. Everything around me felt designed for peace. But my mind refused to rest. I kept replaying his words. Someone has been watching your life for a long time. I sat near the window, looking down at the massive property surrounding the house. The world outside looked peaceful, almost unreal. But I knew better now. Beautiful things could hide complicated stories. My phone sat on the table beside me. It was the same cracked phone from the accident. The same device that had connected my ordinary life to his. I picked it up and looked through my messages. My friends had sent dozens of questions. Where are you? Are you okay? Did you get home? I wanted to answer them. I wanted to tell them everything. But how could I explain this? How could I say that one wrong decision during a storm had brought me into the home of a man whose name I had only heard in whispers? The next morning, I woke up to the sound of rain against the windows. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Then reality returned. I dressed quickly and walked downstairs, expecting to find a room full of strangers. Instead, I found Mr. Romano sitting alone at a long dining table, reading documents while drinking coffee. He looked different in the morning light. Less like the powerful figure everyone feared. More like a man who had not slept either. He looked up when I entered. "Good morning, Emily." I stopped. Hearing my name from him still felt strange. "You know my name. You know my past. But I know nothing about you." He closed the folder in front of him. "That is fair." I sat across from him. "Then tell me." He was quiet for a moment. "My name is Alessandro Romano." The name carried weight, even before I understood why. And I have spent most of my life building things people admire and avoiding things people fear. I studied his face. "That sounds like a complicated way of saying you have secrets." A small breath escaped him. Almost a laugh. "Everyone has secrets. Not everyone has people investigating strangers in the middle of the night." His expression changed slightly. He knew I was right. "You are not a stranger, Emily." Those words made me uncomfortable. "I am to you." He shook his head. "No. That is what I am trying to explain." He reached across the table and placed an old photograph between us. I looked down. It was faded, the edges worn from time. A young woman stood beside a man I did not recognize. In the background was a small house on a quiet street. I looked closer. Something about the image felt familiar. "Who are they?" I asked. Alessandro watched my reaction carefully. "That is the reason I needed to find you." My fingers touched the edge of the photograph. "Why?" His voice became softer. "Because years ago, someone made a promise to protect a person they loved. And that promise was connected to your family." The room became silent. I looked at him, waiting for an explanation. But before he could continue, the older man from the night before entered the room with a worried expression. "Mr. Romano, we have a problem." Alessandro stood immediately. The calm person sitting across from me disappeared, replaced by someone carrying responsibility far heavier than I understood. "What happened?" The man hesitated before answering. "Someone else knows she is here." My heart stopped for a second. Alessandro looked at me. Not with fear. Not with anger. With concern. And that was the moment I realized something important. Whatever this hidden connection was, it was not only about his past. Somehow, it had become part of mine. I could feel the change in the room before anyone said another word. It was not fear exactly. It was awareness. The kind of feeling you get when everyone around you knows something important except you. I looked at Alessandro, waiting for him to explain, but his attention was already focused somewhere beyond the walls of the house. For the first time since I met him, I saw uncertainty in his eyes. Not weakness. Not panic. Just the weight of someone who understood the situation was more complicated than he wanted it to be. "Who knows I am here?" I asked. Alessandro looked back at me. "I do not know yet." That answer should have frightened me. Instead, it made me angry. "You do not know?" My voice became sharper than I expected. "You brought me into this world. You told me my life is connected to something bigger. And now you are telling me you do not know what is happening?" He stayed quiet. I realized then that people probably did not speak to him like this. Most people probably waited for his approval before they even breathed. But I was tired. Tired of being the person everyone protected while nobody explained anything. "Emily," he said calmly, "I understand why you are upset." "No, you do not." The words came out before I could stop them. "You have always lived knowing the rules. You have always had answers." I woke up yesterday thinking about my grocery list and my next shift. Now I am sitting in a mansion with a man who somehow knows my entire life. The room became silent. Alessandro did not interrupt. He simply listened. That surprised me. I expected someone like him to control every conversation. Instead, he let me speak. After a moment, he said, "You are right." 2 simple words. Somehow, they affected me more than any explanation could have. He walked toward the window and looked outside. When I was younger, I believed power meant never needing anyone. I thought if I controlled every detail, nothing could hurt me. He paused. I was wrong. I watched him carefully. There was something different about hearing those words from someone everyone described as untouchable. "What does my family have to do with you?" I asked. Alessandro returned to the table and picked up the old photograph. "Your mother." My breath caught. I had not heard anyone mention her in years without it being painful. "What about my mother?" He looked at the picture. "She helped someone who had nowhere else to turn." "Who?" His eyes met mine. "Me." The answer left me speechless. My mother. The woman I barely remembered. The woman I had lost when I was young. Somehow, she was connected to this man. "That does not make sense," I whispered. "My mother was a nurse. She lived a quiet life." "That is exactly why she mattered," Alessandro said. "She saw a person when everyone else saw a reputation." His words stayed with me. Because that sounded like something my mother would have done. She was the kind of person who helped strangers. The kind of person who believed everyone deserved kindness, even when the world was not kind in return. "Why did you never tell me this before?" I asked. Alessandro looked away. "Because I thought keeping you away from my world was the best way to honor her." A strange feeling moved through me. Anger. Confusion. Curiosity. All mixed together. Before I could respond, the sound of a phone ringing broke the silence. The older man answered quickly. His expression changed as he listened. When he ended the call, he looked at Alessandro. "We found the reason behind the attention." Alessandro's face became serious. "Tell me." The man hesitated. Then he looked at me. "Someone has been searching for Emily Carter because they believe she has something that belongs to her mother." I looked down at my hands. I had spent my entire life believing I was ordinary. But suddenly, the smallest pieces of my past felt like they were part of a story I never knew existed. And standing across from me was the one person who seemed to know how the story began. The room felt smaller after those words. Someone was searching for me. Not because of something I had done. Not because of a mistake I made. But because of something my mother had left behind. I stared at the old photograph on the table, trying to connect the person I remembered with the mystery surrounding me. My mother had always been simple in my memories. Warm hands. A gentle voice. A person who smiled at strangers and remembered everyone's birthday. She never looked like someone connected to secrets. She never looked like someone who could be part of Alessandro Romano's world. "What did she leave behind?" I asked. My voice sounded quieter than I expected. Alessandro looked at the photograph again. "I do not know exactly." That answer surprised me. "You do not know?" He shook his head. "Your mother trusted very few people. She believed information could become dangerous when placed in the wrong hands." I looked around the elegant room. The expensive furniture. The quiet guards outside the doors. Everything about this place reminded me that I was standing in a world built around hidden information. So my mother kept secrets from everyone? I asked. Alessandro's expression softened. No. She protected people from secrets. That sentence stayed with me. It sounded like something she would say. The older man placed a small folder on the table. "This was found in the old records connected to your family." I hesitated before opening it. Inside were copies of documents, old notes, and one handwritten letter. My heart moved faster when I saw the handwriting. I knew it immediately. I had not seen it in years, but I knew every curve of those letters. This is hers, I whispered. My fingers touched the paper carefully, almost afraid it would disappear. I read the first line. Emily, if you are reading this, then the time has come for you to know the truth. I stopped breathing for a moment. My eyes moved across the page. She wrote about choices. About promises. About people who carried heavy responsibilities and never received forgiveness for them. But she never wrote anything that explained everything. It was like she wanted me to discover the truth slowly. Like she knew some answers could hurt more when they arrived all at once. Why did she leave this for me? I asked. Alessandro looked at the letter but did not reach for it. Because she trusted you. She did not even know I would find this. She knew you would ask questions. A small smile appeared on his face. Your mother always said curiosity was a strength. I looked down at the letter again. That sounded exactly like her. When I was a child, she used to tell me that the world was full of locked doors, but every door had a reason for existing. The problem was deciding which ones were worth opening. What was the promise she made? I asked. Alessandro became silent. The silence itself was an answer. It was about my family, he finally said. And yours. Before I could ask more, a soft knock came from the doorway. The woman who welcomed me earlier stood there. Mr. Romano, breakfast is ready. It was such a normal sentence that for a moment I almost forgot everything else. Breakfast. Coffee. A quiet morning. Things that belonged to ordinary life. But my ordinary life was changing piece by piece. I followed Alessandro into the dining room, still holding my mother's letter. I expected him to return to being distant and powerful. Instead, he pulled out a chair for me and sat across from me like we were two people trying to understand the same mystery. You should know something, Emily, he said. Finding you was not part of my plan. I looked up. Then what was? His eyes met mine. Keeping a promise. And for the first time, I wondered if the man everyone feared was not chasing power at all. Maybe he had been carrying a promise for so long that he had forgotten what life felt like without it. I thought I understood Alessandro better after that morning. I was wrong. Understanding someone like him was not something that happened in a single conversation. It happened in small moments. The moments when he thought nobody was watching. The moments when the powerful man disappeared and the person underneath quietly appeared. After breakfast, I expected him to continue explaining the mystery surrounding my mother. Instead, he asked me a question I did not expect. When was the last time you visited her grave? I froze. The question felt personal in a way nothing else had. Years ago, I answered softly. Why? Alessandro looked down at the letter in my hands. Because your mother left something there. My heart skipped. Something important? He nodded. Something she wanted you to find when you were ready. I looked at the letter again. Every part of me wanted answers, but another part was afraid of what those answers would change. I had spent my whole life building an image of my mother from memories. The idea that there was an entire part of her life I never knew existed felt impossible. Why did you wait until now? I asked. Alessandro did not avoid the question. Because I promised her I would not interfere unless she were in danger. I studied his face. And now I am? He looked toward the window. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained gray. Now someone is searching for what your mother protected. I felt a cold feeling move through me. And you think I am the answer? No, he said immediately. I think you are the person she was trying to protect. That answer changed something inside me. For days, maybe years, I had believed my life was ordinary because nothing important had ever happened to me. But maybe I had been wrong. Maybe ordinary was only what I could see. Alessandro arranged for a car to take us to the cemetery that afternoon. I almost refused. Part of me wanted to prove I could handle everything alone. That was how I had survived most of my life. But another part of me knew I needed to understand the truth. The drive was quiet. Not uncomfortable. Just filled with thoughts neither of us knew how to say out loud. When we arrived, I stepped out and felt the familiar ache of returning to a place connected to loss. The cemetery was peaceful. Trees moved gently in the wind. Leaves covered the paths. For a moment, everything felt normal again. I walked toward my mother's resting place slowly. Alessandro stayed several steps behind me. He did not follow too closely. He did not try to take control of the moment. He simply gave me space. That small gesture meant more than he probably realized. I knelt down and touched the stone. "I wish you had told me," I whispered. "I wish I knew who you really were." The words stayed in the quiet air. Then I noticed something beneath the flowers. A small metal box, hidden carefully near the base of the stone. My breath caught. I looked back at Alessandro. He already knew. "You knew it was here," I said. He nodded. "I knew she left something. I did not know what." My hand shook slightly as I opened the box. Inside was an old key and another letter. This one was shorter. Only one sentence was written on the paper. "Emily, when the time comes, trust the person who brings you this key." I stared at those words. Then I slowly looked at Alessandro. The man I had feared yesterday. The man I barely understood today. The man my mother had somehow trusted. And for the first time, I wondered if the biggest mystery was not what my mother left behind. Maybe it was why she believed Alessandro would be the one standing beside me when I found it. I held the key so tightly that its edges pressed into my palm. It was smaller than I expected. Plain brass. Worn smooth from years of being handled before it ever reached me. There was nothing remarkable about it, yet somehow it carried the weight of my mother's final decision. I looked at Alessandro, searching for certainty. Instead, I found the same quiet uncertainty I felt inside myself. "Do you know what it opens?" I asked. He shook his head. "Your mother never told me." His answer surprised me. I had begun to assume he always knew more than everyone else. Seeing him admit that he did not have every answer made him seem less distant. More human. I slipped the key carefully into my coat pocket and folded the letter. As we walked away from the cemetery, I glanced back one last time. The flowers moved gently in the afternoon breeze. For the first time in years, I did not feel like I was leaving my mother behind. I felt like she had just stepped back into my life. The drive back was quieter than before. My thoughts refused to settle. Every memory of my childhood suddenly felt different. My mother had insisted we never throw away old papers. She always reminded me to keep important documents together in one place. At the time, I thought she was simply organized. Now I wondered if she had been preparing me without ever letting me know. Alessandro broke the silence. "Is there anywhere your mother always kept personal belongings?" I closed my eyes, searching through memories that had gathered dust over the years. Then one picture returned with surprising clarity. A small storage unit outside Boston. We had rented it after my father passed away because my mother refused to sell certain family belongings. "There is a storage facility," I said slowly. "I have not been there since college." Alessandro nodded once. "Then that is where we begin." His confidence was steady, but it no longer felt controlling. It felt reassuring. When we returned to the estate, the older advisor was already waiting near the library with several folders spread across a large wooden table. He looked relieved to see the key still in my hand. "Everything is arranged," he said. "The storage company confirmed the unit is still active." I frowned. "How is that possible? I have not paid for it in years." The advisor exchanged a glance with Alessandro before answering. "Someone has continued making the payments every month." I stared at both of them. "Who?" Alessandro looked almost uncomfortable. "I did." I blinked in disbelief. For how long? Since the year your mother passed away. My mind struggled to process what I had heard. You paid for a storage unit belonging to someone you barely knew for all these years? He met my eyes without hesitation. I made a promise that nothing she protected would be lost. I could not find the words to respond. The gesture was too quiet to be impressive, too consistent to be accidental. Month after month. Year after year. Without expecting thanks. Without even knowing whether I would ever discover it. Suddenly the powerful businessman standing across from me looked less like someone driven by influence and more like someone carrying loyalty beyond reason. I looked at the key again. Then tomorrow we go together. Alessandro nodded. Only if that is your choice. I smiled faintly. It is. For the first time since my ordinary life disappeared in the rain, the next step belonged to me. Not to fate. Not to fear. To me. Later that evening, I stood alone on the balcony overlooking the lights of the city. Somewhere beyond those buildings was the small storage unit that had quietly waited through the passing years. Whatever was inside had survived time, distance, and silence. I slipped the key back into my pocket and realized that I was no longer afraid of opening the next door. I was only afraid of how much of my mother's heart I was about to discover. The next morning arrived with clear skies, but my thoughts were heavier than the storm that had started all of this. I stood outside the estate holding a paper cup of coffee that had already gone cold. I had forgotten to drink it. Alessandro walked toward the car wearing the same calm expression he seemed to carry every day, but I was beginning to recognize the details hidden beneath it. The faint shadows under his eyes. The way he checked his watch without really seeing the time. The quiet habit of making sure everyone else was ready before he stepped inside the vehicle himself. He noticed the untouched coffee in my hand. You always let it get cold, he asked. I smiled despite everything. Only when I cannot stop thinking. A small smile appeared on his face. Then I imagine you have not had a warm cup in days. The drive to Boston took several hours. The farther we traveled from Manhattan, the more familiar everything became. Small diners. Gas stations that had looked the same since I was a child. Old brick buildings standing beside newer shopping centers. Every mile brought back another memory I thought I had forgotten. Alessandro let the silence exist without trying to fill it. Somehow that made it easier to speak. My mother used to drive this highway every Thanksgiving, I said quietly. She always packed too much food because she believed someone might need it. He nodded without taking his eyes off the road. That sounds like her. I looked at him. You really knew her. Better than I deserved, he answered. There was regret in those words. Not dramatic regret. The quiet kind that follows a person for years. We reached the storage facility shortly after noon. It looked exactly as I remembered. Rows of metal doors stretched across the property beneath a bright blue sky. The manager greeted us politely before handing me a clipboard. Unit 47, he said. Your account has never missed a payment. I looked at Alessandro again. He simply waited. No expectation. No need for gratitude. Just patience. We walked together down the narrow corridor until we stopped in front of a faded gray door. The number 47 was slightly crooked, as though time itself had become tired. My hand shook as I removed the brass key from my pocket. You can do this, Alessandro said softly. I looked at him. What if whatever is inside changes everything? He answered without hesitation. The truth changes people. It does not erase who they already are. I slid the key into the lock. It turned smoothly, as if it had been waiting for this exact moment. The metal door rolled upward with a slow echo that filled the hallway. Dust floated through the sunlight. At first, nothing looked unusual. Old furniture. Cardboard boxes labeled with my mother's handwriting. Family photo albums. A rocking chair from my childhood. My throat tightened as memories surrounded me from every direction. I stepped inside carefully. Then I noticed something different. Against the back wall stood a wooden chest unlike anything else in the room. It was polished even after all these years. A small brass emblem decorated the front. The same symbol engraved on the key I still held in my hand. Alessandro remained near the entrance instead of following me. He understood this belonged to me first. I knelt beside the chest and brushed away a thin layer of dust. Another lock waited beneath my fingertips. I inserted the key once more. This time the click sounded louder, almost final. I lifted the lid slowly. Inside were neatly organized journals, several sealed envelopes, and a small velvet box resting carefully on top of everything else. My heartbeat became louder than the silence around me. I reached for the first envelope. Across the front, written in my mother's familiar handwriting, were only 6 words. For Emily, when she chooses courage over fear. I closed my eyes for a moment before opening it, realizing that every answer I had been searching for had been waiting patiently inside this forgotten room, trusting that one day I would become brave enough to come back. My fingers hesitated over the envelope for several seconds before I finally broke the seal. The paper inside had yellowed with time, but my mother's handwriting was as steady as I remembered. Every letter looked intentional. Every word carried the quiet confidence of someone who had already accepted the future she could never see. Emily, if this letter has reached your hands, then life has brought you to the crossroads I hoped you would never face. First, I need you to know something. Nothing that happened to our family was your fault. Never carry that weight. I stopped reading for a moment because tears blurred the page. Those were the words I had wanted to hear since I was a little girl. I took a slow breath and continued. There are people in this world who measure strength by power. Others measure it by money. I learned that real strength is measured by the promises you keep when nobody is watching. Alessandro Romano was once a frightened young man who believed he had already lost everything worth saving. I simply reminded him that every life deserves another chance. I looked up at Alessandro. He had remained near the entrance, giving me complete privacy. He was staring toward the open storage door, as though he believed these words belonged only to me. I realized he had probably never read this letter either. I continued. Years ago, he promised me that if anything ever happened to me, he would make certain you always had the freedom to choose your own path. Not his path. Yours. If he has kept that promise, then you already know the difference between a person who controls others and a person who protects them. My heart tightened. Every conversation from the past few days suddenly felt different. Every choice Alessandro had left in my hands. Every time he had stepped back instead of deciding for me. None of it had been an accident. He had been honoring her words all along. I reached into the chest and carefully lifted the small velvet box. Inside rested a silver locket decorated with delicate flowers engraved around its edges. I opened it slowly. On one side was a tiny photograph of my parents smiling together long before illness and loss entered our lives. On the other side was a folded piece of paper. I unfolded it carefully. A bank name. A safety deposit box number. Another key number written beneath it. I frowned. Alessandro. He walked over quietly. What is it? I handed him the note. His eyes moved across the paper before settling on mine. She planned farther ahead than either of us imagined. I looked back into the wooden chest. Beneath the journals lay one final folder tied with a faded blue ribbon. On the cover my mother had written, "Open this together." I looked at Alessandro. She wanted both of us to read it. He hesitated. Are you certain? I nodded. She was speaking to both of us from the beginning. He sat beside me on the old wooden floor, leaving enough space between us that I never felt crowded. Together we untied the ribbon. Inside were photographs, handwritten notes, and one document describing the creation of a charitable medical foundation my mother had dreamed about but never had the chance to build. At the bottom of the page she had written one final sentence. If you are reading this together, then the future has already given both of you something I could only hope for. Trust each other more than you trust fear. I lowered the papers into my lap. The room fell silent except for the faint sound of wind outside the open storage door. Alessandro did not speak immediately. When he finally did, his voice was almost a whisper. She never stopped believing people could become better. I looked at him and realized the greatest thing my mother had protected was never hidden inside a chest, a key, or a forgotten storage unit. It was hope. And somehow, after all these years, she had entrusted both of us with carrying it forward. I did not realize how long we had been sitting on the floor until the afternoon sunlight shifted across the concrete. Dust drifted through the narrow beams of light, making the tiny storage unit feel strangely peaceful. The world outside continued moving as if nothing had changed, yet my entire understanding of my family had been rewritten inside a room no larger than a one-car garage. I carefully gathered my mother's letters and placed them back inside the wooden chest. My hands no longer trembled. For the first time since that rainy night, I felt something I had almost forgotten. Direction. Alessandro remained beside me in thoughtful silence. He never reached for the papers. Never asked to examine them. He simply waited until I decided what should happen next. That patience reminded me of every sentence my mother had written. She had trusted him because he understood that protecting someone did not mean taking away their choices. I closed the lid of the chest gently. I want to build it, I said. Alessandro looked at me. Build what? The foundation. Saying the words aloud made them feel real. She dreamed about giving families medical care they could actually afford. She never stopped believing ordinary people deserved extraordinary kindness. I smiled through tears. I do not want that dream to stay inside a folder forever. Alessandro did not answer immediately. He studied the handwritten proposal again before speaking. It would take time. I know. Resources. I know. People who believe in it. I looked directly at him. I think my mother already found one. For a moment he said nothing. Then he lowered his eyes with an expression I had never seen before. Humility. The powerful man who could negotiate with executives and politicians seemed completely unprepared for simple gratitude. She gave me more than another chance, he said quietly. She reminded me that becoming successful means nothing if your success cannot improve someone else's life. We finished organizing the contents of the chest before leaving the storage unit. I carried the journals myself. Alessandro carried the heavier boxes without being asked. Neither of us spoke much during the drive back. We did not need to. Some conversations happened more honestly in silence. As evening settled over the highway, my phone buzzed for the first time in hours. It was my supervisor from the hospital. Emily, everyone has been worried. Please call when you can. I stared at the message longer than I expected. My old life was still waiting for me. My patients. My coworkers. My apartment. Everything I had left behind only a few days earlier. Alessandro noticed my expression. You miss your work? I nodded. Very much. Then you should go back. I looked at him in surprise. Just like that? He smiled faintly. Your mother wanted you to choose your own path. I have no intention of standing in the way of it. I laughed softly. You keep making it difficult to be angry with you. I will consider that progress. The laughter disappeared as quickly as it came, replaced by a comfortable quiet neither of us felt pressured to fill. When we reached the estate that evening, the older advisor was waiting at the entrance. Everything is ready, he said. The appointment with the bank has been confirmed for tomorrow morning. I almost forgot about the safety deposit box. Another piece of my mother's plan still waited to be uncovered. I looked toward the darkening sky and wondered how many more surprises she had quietly prepared years before I understood why. As I walked inside carrying the journals against my chest, I realized something that had never crossed my mind before. The greatest inheritance my mother left me was not hidden in locked boxes or forgotten documents. It was the courage to keep opening doors even when I had no idea what waited on the other side. And somehow, without either of us expecting it, Alessandro had become the person walking beside me each time another door appeared. The following morning felt different from every morning before it. I woke before sunrise without an alarm, unable to quiet the anticipation building inside me. Outside the windows, the first light painted the gardens in shades of silver and gold. For the first time since my life had changed, I no longer felt like I was running from something. I was walking toward it. Alessandro was already waiting in the library with 2 cups of coffee. One was sitting exactly where I usually chose to sit. It was still steaming. "This one is still warm," he said without looking up from the folder in front of him. I laughed softly. "You noticed?" "I notice more than people think." I took the cup and finally enjoyed coffee before it turned cold. It was a small moment, but somehow it reminded me that life was beginning to feel normal again in the most unexpected place. The drive to the bank was quiet, the road still nearly empty. Morning sunlight reflected across the buildings as the city slowly woke around us. When we arrived, the branch manager greeted Alessandro with professional respect before leading us into a private room. A steel door opened after several security checks, and moments later she returned carrying a long black deposit box. She placed it carefully on the table before leaving us alone. I looked at the box without moving. I thought opening the storage unit would answer everything, I admitted. Instead, it only created more questions. Alessandro nodded. "Sometimes the truth arrives in chapters." I removed the small numbered key from my mother's envelope and slid it into the lock beside the bank manager's master key. The mechanism clicked with surprising ease. Together we lifted the lid. Inside was almost nothing. One sealed envelope, a leather journal, and a folded legal document. No jewels. No hidden fortune. No dramatic secrets. Just paper. I smiled through a quiet sigh. That sounds like my mother. I opened the envelope first. "Emily, if you have reached this moment, then you already know that kindness leaves a longer legacy than fear ever will." I continued reading slowly. "The legal document transfers ownership of the charitable medical foundation to you. Everything required to begin has already been prepared. I could never build it myself, but perhaps you will build it with people who still believe compassion can change lives." I felt my throat tighten again. My mother had planned this years before she passed away. She had never stopped believing the dream would survive, even if she did not. Alessandro quietly unfolded the legal papers. "She established the foundation legally," he said, sounding genuinely surprised. "The funding was placed into a protected trust many years ago." I stared at him. "You did not know?" He shook his head. "She only asked me to make certain these documents remained untouched until you were ready." I opened the leather journal next. The first pages contained plans for free clinics, scholarship programs for nursing students, and partnerships with community hospitals across the country. Every page reflected the woman I remembered. Practical. Hopeful. Generous. Tucked into the final page was one last handwritten note. "Emily, dreams become real only when ordinary people decide they are worth protecting. Do not build this foundation because it was my dream. Build it because one day it becomes someone else's chance to keep living with dignity." I closed the journal carefully and held it against my chest. Alessandro remained silent until I looked at him. "She trusted us," I whispered. "She trusted you long before she trusted me." He smiled gently. "She trusted your heart before either of us understood what it could become." As we walked out of the bank into the bright morning sunlight, I realized the greatest mystery had finally been solved. My mother had never been hiding money or secrets. She had been protecting an opportunity. An opportunity for kindness to outlive her. And standing beside the man she once believed could change, I understood that her greatest act of faith had not only transformed his future. It had quietly transformed mine as well. Several months passed before I truly understood how completely my life had changed. The foundation that had once existed only in my mother's careful handwriting had become real. Every morning I unlocked the doors of a clinic built on the simple belief that compassion should never depend on a person's bank account. Nurses greeted patients by name. Children laughed in waiting rooms painted with bright colors instead of dull walls. Families who had delayed medical care because they could not afford it finally walked through doors that welcomed them without judgment. Sometimes I stood quietly near the entrance just to watch those ordinary moments unfold. They reminded me that miracles rarely arrived with applause. Most of them entered quietly, carrying grocery bags, holding a child's hand, or smiling through difficult days because someone had chosen kindness first. Alessandro never asked to place his name on the building. In fact, he insisted it remain exactly as my mother had envisioned. Her name stood above the entrance in simple silver letters. Every time I saw it, I felt like she was still keeping her promise to help people, only now through all of us. He visited often, never with an announcement, never surrounded by attention. Sometimes he brought coffee for the overnight staff. Sometimes he spent an hour speaking with veterans, single parents, or elderly patients waiting for transportation home. They never knew the full story behind the quiet man in the tailored suit. To them he was simply someone who listened without checking the time. Watching him reminded me of something my mother once wrote. Real change happens when nobody is asking you to become better, yet you choose it anyway. One afternoon I found him standing outside beneath the maple tree we had planted during the clinic's opening ceremony. Autumn leaves drifted around us while children played near the community garden volunteers had built beside the parking lot. "You look happy," he said. I smiled. I finally understand what she was trying to give us. He looked toward the clinic entrance where a young nurse was helping an elderly woman inside. So do I. I reached into my purse and removed the old brass key that had started everything. I had carried it every day since finding it beneath my mother's flowers. "I think I know what this really opened," I said. Alessandro looked at the worn metal resting in my hand. "It was never the storage unit." I shook my head. "It opened a life I never knew I was meant to live." He smiled quietly. "Your mother would be proud of you." I laughed softly. She would probably remind me to stop letting my coffee get cold. He actually laughed, the sound genuine and unguarded, and I realized how rarely I had heard it during those first difficult days. Power had once defined the man standing beside me. Now peace suited him better. As the sun slowly disappeared behind the trees, patients continued arriving, nurses continued working, and life continued moving exactly as it should. Nothing about the evening looked extraordinary. Yet everything about it was. A single rainy night had brought two completely different worlds together. I thought fate had interrupted my life. Instead, it had quietly introduced me to the promise my mother had protected for years. I came searching for answers about the past, but I found something far more valuable. I found purpose. I found forgiveness where I expected fear. I found hope where I expected secrets. And I learned that the strongest people are never the ones who make the world fear them. They are the ones who quietly make the world feel safer simply because they chose to care. Whenever someone asks me how this story began, I never speak about wealth, mystery, or power. I remember the rain. I remember a stranger who gave me a choice instead of an order. And I remember my mother's greatest lesson, the one that changed both our lives long before I understood it. A promise kept with kindness will always outlive a life ruled by fear.